mute. So we'll go ahead. And are you thinking about making the Kiwatan bed and breakfast again? Because I stayed on the previous ship one time.
No. In a word, that was a huge task that, well, I won't say no, absolutely, because some of these cabins on the Kiwatan are, they have the standard cabin that was basically tourist class. But then they have about, I think, 8 what I would call luxury suites that have their own ensuite bathrooms with bathtubs and everything. And they're all finely fitted out. They've got either mahogany or oak paneling, and they're really fine rooms. The problem with getting a B&B going is you've got all sorts of regulations that come into play that really are a lot stiffer than the current regulations will have as it being just a museum ship, because you've got people sleeping on board, so that will put all sorts of additional requirements on for fire and health and safety that just having a museum ship wouldn't have. So I don't anticipate it happening, but I won't say it's impossible.
Our next first person who raised their hand is Diane. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, all of you, for your presentations. They were amazing. I wondered, have you had a talk with Port McNicoll, and why would they want to give up the Kiwatan? We did visit there on one of our Shellback excursions a few years ago, and it is a spectacular ship, and it would be a wonderful asset for the museum. But why would Port McNicoll want to give it up?
Well, the owner of the Kiwatan is Skyline Investments. And I don't know if you know all the backstory of that, but it was Skyline Investments that paid to bring the ship to Port McNicoll. And it was then called Skyline Development. And they were going to build a huge development around the ship, basically. And the Port McNicoll, which was a port that was basically man-made for the purpose of the transshipment of as departing, for the Kiwatan to leave and go up to Fort William. And but over a couple of years, the plans changed for Skyline Development, and they wanted to get rid of the ship, and some of the management changed of Skyline Development as well. And in that interim, it also changed the Skyline Investments. And so the R.J. Peterson Foundation was created when the ship came to Port McNicoll to oversee the Kiwatan as a not-for-profit. And therefore, as a not-for-profit like the museum is, they qualified to apply to Heritage Canada, or as it's called today, Canadian Heritage, to see if they could get the ship designated as Canadian cultural property. And so doing, if they could get it designated, they could write a tax receipt for the ship, because that is ultimately what Skyline Investments wants, to get rid of the ship. They don't want to sell it for just cash or anything like that. They want the tax receipt, which will give them millions of dollars in tax write-offs if they gift the ship to a not-for-profit organization such as R.J. Peterson or the Marine Museum. So R.J. Peterson actually went through a period where they applied, they did all the application process through the Canadian Conservation Institute and Heritage Canada to apply, and their application was rejected because they didn't fulfill the preservation needs that were required by the Canadian Conservation Institute. So it's a very long application process where you have to identify how you're going to preserve the ship and maintain it and so on. Well, the R.J. Peterson Foundation is not a museum as the Marine Museum is. We already had 40 years experience as a museum that we could demonstrate that we could preserve cultural artifacts, some of them which were Canadian cultural artifacts that we've had for many years. And so we went through the application process. After they were rejected, Skyline Investments approached us, the Marine Museum, to see if we could perhaps submit another application that would be successful, which we have done. And we're now waiting to hear back from Heritage Canada with on our application to see what further questions they have. It's a process that's going to go on until at least probably August of this year. We submitted our application in September of 2020. So as you can see, it takes months and months for them to review all the requirements that are necessary for them to designate it. And we don't even know if we'll be successful ourselves at this point. If we're not, then then Skyline Investments will then have to make another determination of whether they're going to either sell the ship or scrap it, basically. But
It'd be awful.
yeah, it would be awful. So, but anyway, the short answer is the people up in Port McNichol, the R.J. Peterson Foundation, their application to have the ship designated so they could write a tax receipt failed. And so that's why we were approached as a museum to see if our experience and credentials, and we had also had the experience of keeping a museum ship in the Alexander Henry for all those years. So, and we have the added benefit that we can move this ship into our dry dock and actually display the ship dry. Whereas in Port McNichol, it will always be floating. And eventually that's going to cost somebody a lot of money to replace the bottom of the ship.
Maintenance, of course, of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next question is Spencer Williams. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you very much to all of you for an amazing presentation. We visited the museum when the exhibit of the Canadian yachting was up, and we were on our way to visit it in 2019 when we found out it was in boxes. So we're glad to know that it's coming around again. One question we have is, do you have a relationship with the Marine Archives in Picton? And a second question is, will you have mooring for sailing boats to come alongside the museum?
Yeah, good question. To the first, we don't have a formal relationship with the Navy Library in Picton. And one of the reasons is its main focus is naval artifacts and library and so forth, the archives. Which really is most of their collection has to do with the oceans, maritime history, whereas we're strictly Great Lakes. Now there is some overlap because, for instance, our dry dock and shipyard built corvettes which were used in World War II and out in the oceans and so forth. But we don't have a formal connection to them. We'd like to strengthen that connection though as time goes on and we get reestablished. So we'll see what happens there. And as for mooring, most definitely we hope to have, like Rob said earlier, we own the water lots in the Eastern Pier still. And we'd like to get the brigantine to come down and moor there. The Red Jacket will be there. And I'm sure we'll have room for transients to come and dock there from time to time as well, as long as there's not another event boat or something like that take up the space.
Okay, thank you. The next person, George Hume, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask a question.
are you sure that the Kiwatan is asbestos free?
A lot of the asbestos was removed when it was down in Michigan. And it does have asbestos, particularly in the engine room that's wrapping all the steam pipes and heating pipes and so forth. But it's all been, when I surveyed it, it all looked like it was in really good condition. It doesn't have any insulation in the interior sides of the hull, as some of the Alexander Henry did. So it has a very minimal amount of asbestos compared to what the Henry had. And it's all visible, and it's all encased in a kind of a casting material that seems to be holding up very well. So I'm not anticipating any problems with asbestos, but for our due diligence, we're going to have what they call an asbestos management plan. And we'll have professionals come in there and evaluate the asbestos on the ship, and we'll have a plan that's accepted by Department of Labor and so forth, and meets all those requirements.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Marie Garbly. Go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question. Go ahead, Marie. You need to unmute yourself.
Seems to be frozen.
Okay. What I wanted to know is if they ever used that Kiwatan for Murdoch Mysteries, like when they were on the Great Lakes for one of the episodes.
They did. I forget which episode it was, but we've been given a gift book, kind of like a coffee table book that highlights one of the episodes that they did on it, and they used it. They used it in some simulation, like showing it moving down the lake and so forth. But I forget which episode it was.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next person, Julia, go ahead, unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. I'm very interested, Michelle, in what you had to say. And as Diane knows well, we're both into education of the young. I have in ITEC, when we existed, we had a Marine Peace Parks Award, and I still have some pins left over that I might be able to give away. The questions I have are you focused at all on any of the climate change global issues? Because I now run the Global Issues Project, Council on Global Issues. Not that I'm doing anything. Plastics in the ocean, general pollution. I know tourism is a tick because ITEC was International Holistic Tourism Education and programs around tourism related issues, and of course education. And what is your background in teaching or educating? Thank you, and clap, clap.
All right, I'll try to answer those questions, but please let me know if I missed anything. So our current environmental programs, we have two that are in place. One is about invasive species, and one is about water pollution. So we explore the impact of pollution on the Great Lakes and freshwater resources. So that, as Doug said, we're a Great Lakes Museum, so our focus is definitely on the freshwater. So those are the two that we have in place at the moment. And we are working to develop and expand that offering. As we get into the planning stage of moving back, we're going to be looking at building an environmental gallery and having programs that divvy off of that, taking kids out on the water, using our location as a testing space, as a monitoring hub. So there'll be programs that we'll be developing specifically having to do with climate change, and more focused on climate change and the Great Lakes and freshwater. So they're not, I wouldn't say that they're climate change specific at the moment. They do deal with environmental factors and the impact of people on our natural environments, but they're not they don't dive too much into climate change at this time. That being said, that is certainly an area that we're going to be working towards. It's an area we know that we need to build upon, and it's just going to be acquiring the resources to be able to do that at this time. In terms of my educational background, I have experience teaching elementary school students, high school students. I taught in France for a period of time, and definitely have experience dealing with now with camps as well as some school programs, but certainly kind of the more academic side, the university teaching would be my primary area, but do have experience with the younger kids as well, through a number of different backgrounds.
Thank you very much. That's most interesting. I was very impressed with what you had to say.
Thank you. But please do reach out about anything that you are doing. I'd be very much interested in hearing more about the work that you're talking about in terms of the climate change education. And I think there's certainly opportunity there for further discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, Spencer, if you raised your head again, go ahead, unmute and ask your question.
A really quick question. With the pop-up educational things you have, is there any thought of putting them around different ports around the lake?
That is a terrific idea. I can't say that it's come across my mind at this time. I mean, one aspect that we were looking at putting out into the community was a virtual exhibit that is still in the development side. It has to do with Great Lakes shipwrecks, that we kind of saw as more in terms of the local community, but and it kind of goes into the whole traveling exhibition type thing. We need to build an exhibit that we can send out on loan. It's a great concept, and I'll certainly take that into consideration. Thank you.
Jim, go ahead and mute yourself and ask your question.
I was wondering if a possible exhibit would be to get the different technologies for making plastics compostable. And I had a friend who was manufacturing plastic bags with starch added in the compound to make it, and that makes them compostable. And there are other technologies evolving for water bottles, etc. And I thought that would be a theme that would be quite interesting.
It's a Rob Mazza question, I think.
No, it's Michelle for sure.
I think it's a question perhaps a bit for all of us, because you're talking specifically about an exhibit idea, and certainly I think that's it's an interesting one to tie into an environmental gallery and talking about reusable resources. Yes, reusable resources, that are providing more sustainable resources for our environment that we can use, and talking about how that might be possible and the impact it might have on various different components of our environment. It's certainly something we should consider when we're talking about our environmental gallery, and I'll make sure to bring that up with our environmental guru on our board, who's leading on that particular priority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll now turn it back to Diane to wrap up the session.
Yes, I don't know quite where to begin. I guess I'll go one person at a time. Rob, you once again gave us such a lovely overview of the history of where this museum has come from, and where the Sailing Hall of Fame, preserving Canadian heritage and sailing. It's amazing and absolutely wonderful that it is happening. I love the idea of the registering of historic Canadian sailing craft. I think that's an important aspect of what needs to happen in the museum. So thank you for that terrific overview and history of where the museum came from. Doug, your look at what's going to happen in the future with respect to the Keewatin, I do hope that happens. The fact that we would have another historic vessel as some place that would be easy to visit for many, many tourists in Kingston. And then just the restoring of the building. What a sacrilege it was that the owner did not lock the doors and keep the heat on. It would have made it so much easier. So I wish you all the best in your fundraising to restore everything and bring it back to a place where people can visit and see the heritage of Canadian marine life and sailing. And Michelle, I am really excited by the exhibits you're putting up, that the Get Wrecked, the pop-up exhibits, the youth programs, and if you and Julia can get together with respect to what she's done, she's also done amazing work, and you can find that on her website. And I will make sure that there are connections, emails, etc., so that you can connect. It would be totally worthwhile to have her input as well. And again, thank you both. This has been a marathon actually of a presentation. We are now at 10 to 3. I think it's a record for the time. And I have to say that we haven't lost very many people. So I thank all of you for that. And again, what a pleasure to have you here. That brings us to next week. We will have Trevor Campbell, who speak to us about life with theater pirates, story from his time as a theater artist with the Caravan Stage Company, an arts community that lived, worked, and performed on a custom-built 30-meter Thames River Spretzel barge. And the presentation will be quite a bit shorter because Trevor has some obligations at 1:30, so we won't be going quite as long as we have today. And the following week, courtesy of Bruce Anderson, a former skipper, we have the pleasure of seeing the beginning of the story of the Royal Clipper, which is the largest and only 5-masted, full-rigged sailing ship built. With her complement of 42 sails, the Royal Clipper is a splendid sight to behold. What Bruce has done is he's prepared he had a video given to him of the building of this ship. He has split it into 3 parts. We will see the first part next week. I will give you a little bit of a beginning to that. And then down the line, we will see the other 2 parts. So with that, we have a reminder that we will have breakout rooms afterwards, although we may not have many people who want to stick around, but we will have breakout rooms afterwards. And with that, pipes out.